Hello, welcome to the MoFounders Videocast. My name is Stephen James, a partner at Morrison Foerster, or MoFo as we're widely known. MoFounders is a MoFo initiative designed to bring together a community of entrepreneurs, investors and advisors. My guest today on the videocast is Eva Dobrzanska, the Managing Director and founder of the Fundraising Playbooks, which helps startup founders reach more investors with step-by-step strategies used to raise investment. Her playbooks have helped founders secure new investment leads to VCs and many high-profile investors, including Mark Cuban and Richard Branson. Her masterclasses are regularly oversubscribed, with a record of 1,000 subscribers earlier this year. Eva, welcome to the MoFounders Videocast. I wanted to start off by asking you, what is the Fundraising Playbooks? How did you come up with the idea and what problem were you trying to solve with it?
Amazing. Yeah. So I actually never had a moment where I sat down and I mapped out what is the gap in the market, at which point I would have realized, okay, that's the problem I want to address. It's more of a collection of everything that I've picked up and learned across my career so far. I was working for a fintech startup, I was working for a matchmaking introducer advisory, for an investment firm, for a startup incubator, for an angel syndicate, and I always thought of it as quite scattered until I've put it all together into Fundraising Playbooks, because being able to see some really great things on how founders raise and also management of the companies, the good, the bad, the ugly. I feel like I've put it all together and, you know, it's sort of like the mind palace of everything that I've learned. And it's exactly what it sounds like it is. It is playbooks for fundraising in a much more effective way and one that actually works.
Yeah, because it strikes me that there's lots of sort of disparate information. You see advice on LinkedIn, you see certain posts here and there, but there's no one who's really bringing it together and say, here's a roadmap for you, here's a methodology. And it sounds like that's what you were trying to achieve. Exactly.
So I've, you know, when I've started in the world of startups about half a decade ago, I was learning a lot of these stuff myself. And I've quickly picked up on the fact that there's so much content out there that's just very generic and theoretical, and you know, you read it and you listen to it and it's like, that's not really saying how things are done. You know, people will tell you, oh, you gotta leverage your network. Well, how? And I have not found content that will tell you step 1, do this, step 2, say this, step 3, do this. And that's exactly what I decided to do.
Yeah, and tell me a bit more about your background, like what makes you qualified to advise those startups in terms of outreach and how to make themselves more investable.
Yeah, so I've been on the side of the table around the investor side, and I worked for a number of different, you know, actors in the, let's say, it's investment ecosystem. So I started out my career in Sydney when I worked for a small fintech company that went from 0 to 2 million ARR in about 2 years. I was their employee number 1, so sort of like a right-hand woman to the CEO, and it felt like a co-founder role in many sense. Then I worked for a small advisory as well. I've started working with founders myself, then an investment firm, a startup incubator, so I've picked up a lot. And now, if you ask me what makes me qualified, I would say the results speak for itself.
Well, okay, and we'll go into that in a lot more detail, because I'd love to talk about some of those examples. So, if I'm wanting to work with you as potentially a new as a startup, and I want to get to know you and understand how you would help, how does that outreach process work? Like, how involved do you get? Are you drafting the emails for them? Are you working with the founders? Are you tailoring things? Are there templates? How does it work? So so start to unpick the fundraising playbook and how you would work to me if I come to you as a new startup, a new founder, one potential client.
Yeah. It's exactly what you said. It's a fully bespoke, done for you end-to-end service. So it's me building the investor list, me doing the research and due diligence on every single one of the targets, and then me actually drafting the messages to be sent, and the whole of playbooks as well. So cold email especially is a big portion of what I do. I'm a big fan of an egalitarian approach to capital raising, where you can reach any investor anywhere at any point.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
That's exactly what I show founders to do, that methodology, that skill set. I've cold emailed my way to Richard Branson's team. I've cold emailed Mark Cuban. He did reply to me. I'm getting replies from partners at VC levels in 24 hours. 10 years ago, I came to UK completely by myself. I didn't know a soul. Not a parent, not a friend, not a business connection, completely blank slate. So I've built it all up by myself, and all of the networks that I've got today. 700 investors I spoke to and 40,000 followers on LinkedIn. It's entirely self-made. And I want to show the founders how it's done.
And that's incredibly impressive, isn't it? I think it's just because you've basically acted as a founder yourself, which I think must give you that natural affinity with other startups, other founders who are trying to make their own way. And obviously you can see the value and demonstrated the importance of building your network. So on the point of investors, because you said that one of the things you help to do is put together a target list of investors. Tell me how that works. How do you select the right investors? How do you know which way to do it? Because I think a lot of founders will say, well, yeah, I'd love to get investment, but how do you find the right investors, the right type of investors too, whether it's VCs, whether it's angels? So how do you come up with that perfect sort of formula for your different startup clients?
Yes. So I do have a bit of an unfair advantage that I've built over the years, because I spoke to all of those investors, and I would go on a call and I would ask them super targeted questions, not just what verticals you invest in, what stage, what geography, but also, what happens in your due diligence stage? What's some of the red flags for you in a founder? What percentage equity of cap table would you want them to have? What equity do you aim for? So really in-depth questions. But then when it comes to finding your ideal investor target, I've developed my algorithm for it, for the ideal investor profiling. And it's looking for certain positive adjustment signals and negative adjustment signals. So if an investor invests in your vertical, industry, stage, and geography, you could say it's a good target, but I only assign them with a baseline of 50 points, because it's still a 50-50 chance of whether they will invest in you or not. And then on the positive adjustment side, for example, you can have, if that investor has expressed a positive view on your technology area or on your business model, like add 10 points. If that investor's LP's mandate aligns strategically with what you do, add 30 points. If your go-to-market strategy aligns with where they're based and what they're doing strategically, add 15 points. So to give you an example, one of the clients that I used to work with, we were targeting BP Ventures. So I went on BP Ventures website, and I was also doing research on BP, and I found their net zero progress update. I've read through that update, and one of the things that they said is that they are embarking on a project to build 80 renewable gas plants. And my client, who was in this supply chain optimization space, that was perfect. That's a perfect link. So what we had put in that initial cold outreach email, we literally said, I've read your report on the net zero progress update, and I've noticed you're about to embark on building 80 of the renewable gas plants. Supply chain optimization will be key, because these are all of the things that can go wrong, and this is how our solution can address all of those things for you. And then we've actually created a slide on this in their pitch deck once they got the meeting. I believe they're now in due diligence stage with them.
Fabulous.
So that's some of the things.
Yeah, and I think that's the extraordinary thing, isn't it? It seems like it's one thing you identify that opportunity, it's another thing actually getting them there and then to that kind of position. Also, presumably there's lots of competition to get people there. So so again, like if you're working with a startup and you say, okay, we potentially identified this opportunity, are you going to be mapping out the whole strategy? At what point does the outreach point? How much preparation is there and research done before you do the outreach? Because I think I imagine one of the traps that a lot of startups fall into is that they'll do the outreach too early, they'll get it wrong, and it'll be clunky. So how do you make that work and be effective?
There's no shortcuts to it. It takes long. For me to research one investor target that I have assigned with 90% fit to my client or above, could be even an hour of my time to do the research, to read all of that, to really learn what is it that they seek strategically. And you really have to think holistically of it. So I will go through their portfolio, I will see who's in their portfolio, I will have a think if my client can partner with some of the other companies in the portfolio. I will dig out articles to see which portfolio companies are doing well in the market, because these are the ones that VC is likely to follow on. So there's a lot of dynamics here that come into play. And then when it comes to the fundraising playbooks itself that I am building for my clients, we would develop a full strategy on how to go about reaching that investor. Usually it starts with a cold email, because I do love a good cold email.
And again, we'll talk about that in a second, but the idea of the trigger being these cold emails, we'll touch on it, mate, but you carry on,
So let's say, like step 1, send this cold email, and I would draft it. Step 2, follow up with a follow-up email just 1 or 2 days later. Step 3, go on that investor's LinkedIn, like their post and comment. Step 4, there's this event when they're talking on a panel, go to that event. Step 5, send a second follow-up email. Step 6, add them to your progress update. Step 7, reach out to that other person who knows them and ask them to say something about you. 7 touch points. If you know anything about sales, it takes 7 touch points on average to close a prospect. It's no different in capital raising, but here you have to adjust it slightly so that it is not so salesy, it's more relationship oriented. It's a whole different ballgame.
And just to go back to that point around cold emails, so I think a lot of us, whether we're in the startup sector or not, will have that same almost fear about sending cold emails in terms of how a lot of people just won't do it. They will just wait for they either will ignore it or they'll wait for a warm introduction through some kind of connection. Similarly, a lot of us would have been on the receiving end when we've received cold emails, cold messages, LinkedIn messages, whatever it is, selling us stuff that we don't want, and it's an instant turn off. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that a cold email, a cold message is actually going to attract the interest of a potential investor, and particularly some of the names that you mentioned earlier on? How on earth do you do that? Can you give us a few examples of that?
Of course. What I've described earlier with the targeting and the ideal investor profiling, a great cold email starts with a great investor target. So you need to have that very, very clear strategic reason of why are you reaching out to them. Just because you're raising capital and just because you want money, that's not a good enough reason. Everybody wants it. So you have to be able to find that deeper strategic link and open that email with it so that you catch their attention first, which is crucial. I've seen so many businesses that have great traction metrics, they're growing month on month, and they have everything that the investors could want, but they fail to raise. And the mismatch is because in capital raising, your strategy is only as good as your ability to articulate it. And we live in such an attention deficit economy where, personalizing that email and standing out is no longer nice to have, it's a must to have. Everyone's bombarded with emails. To put things in perspective, I think, it's 2025, basically. We live in such a time where we can get exposed to more ideas, concepts, and thoughts fly by in a 30-minute TikTok binge compared to what our ancestors would have been exposed to throughout the entirety of their lifetimes. So I'm also not surprised that there's adult onset of ADHD and all of that things happening. We've got millions of tabs open. And so the key questions that you have to ask yourself and that the founders have to ask themselves is, how do you break through the noise? Last century, the difficulty was lack of choice. You had limited choices. Now we have too much.
And on that point then, when you are trying to get people's attention, because I just think of my own inbox, hundreds of emails a day, goodness knows how many LinkedIn messages on top of that, and you have to try and prioritize. And I think, to your point as well, so many of us have been affected by that. It's all about, you get a few seconds of attention, you can't really elsewhere, there are constant distractions. So how do you do it? Because also, I guess you don't want to be too contrived either. So how do you strike that balance? And also if you're trying to contact someone on LinkedIn, you only have a certain number of characters that you can use.
Yes.
So how do you, if I were to try and approach an investor, how do I do that, given you've got things with those limitations?
So for LinkedIn, the playbook that I've got for it is called short cliffhangers.
Okay, nice.
Because you want to send out a message that has a number of short cliffhangers scattered throughout it. And, LinkedIn is ultimately a social media platform, so it's got its own rules. And, the opening connection request note that you sent to people is only 300 characters long. A lot of founders might be tempted to send that connection note or even an email, and, it's this long, and they explain everything about this startup, and they explain how it's a great fit to that investor, and they say all of these things. For email, maybe it would work. I would advise to split it across a number of emails rather than just one. But for LinkedIn, forget it. So for LinkedIn, short cliffhangers, what I do, instead of saying, we're this startup, we do this and that, we've achieved this and so on and so forth, I would say something to the likes of, hi, investor name. I looked up your thesis. I've seen some of the companies in your portfolio. I'm running a B2B enterprise SaaS that is revenue generating, and I can think of solid answers of why we are a fit to each of the 3 key attributes mentioned in your report.
Okay, that sounds very effective. No, that's good. And so is your view then that cold outreach emails, messages can be as effective as a warm introduction? Do you think they can be?
They are. I've seen it.
Really?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've absolutely seen it. Look, when it comes to the world of cold emailing, the bar is on the floor.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, actually you can just make small incremental changes that will result in amazing results. It really does not take that much. And if you can find that way of relationship building in those emails, especially when you're reaching out to investors, I've not done any cold emails in sales. That's a whole different game.
Right. When
you're trying to sell a product. And I wouldn't dare go there. It's tough. And I have huge amounts of respect for people who do that. But in the world of capital raising and investor outreach, this is more for relationship building. You're seeking out a partnership, really, an investment, completely different. And there's playbooks for it. Yeah,
no, clearly. And in terms of the methodology then, it sounds like there's a bit of psychology in there. It's about relationships. It sounds like it's about doing your research and preparing. So what are these the essential ingredients to it? Are there any other ingredients to it? Like how, in terms of the methodology, how does it work, and what would be your top tips for a startup to make sure that they can absolutely hit the right level of investor engagement, whether it's the cold email, initial outreach, or the whole piece in terms of making sure that they lock in that engagement from the investors?
So that 7 touch points of interaction, it's about stacking them on top of each other. And in the playbooks that I am building for my clients when I'm working with them, we could incorporate introductions as well. And we do, because, it's another interaction on top. So the reason why so many founders raise on the back of an interaction is because, it's that extra touch point that they have. And 2, it also benefits from the halo effect, which is the cognitive bias whereby we are more likely to judge something in a more positive light just because of the first positive impression to it. So if you get warmly introduced, then that helps. Yeah. But also, I spoke with one of the early stage VC investors in the UK on the topic of introductions. And, their partner said to me, an introduction means something, but it's only if it's from someone I trust. So that VC fund, they track every single introduction that gets made to them, and they have a scoring system for them to be able to ascertain what quality introductions actually are being made. So I think nowadays introductions they can be quite overrated. Everyone thinks it's the golden ticket to a check, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, because that's interesting to know, because I've always felt that introductions can help bridge the sort of trust gap.
They do, they do.
And so that's interesting. It's almost like what you're trying to do is to bridge that trust gap through another way. And then you're saying also that the quality of that introduction may not necessarily be as valuable as you think it might be, depending on who the referrals come from, and also whether that person's got a track record of making positive introductions.
I'm getting introductions in my inbox over almost every single day from people I don't know to people I don't know.
Yeah.
It's but yeah.
So you mentioned at the beginning about being able to get responses within incredibly short time frames from very high profile investors and individuals. How on earth does that happen then? And was that a surprise to you, how quickly you got some of those responses from, say, Richard Branson's team, Mark Cuban, Sequoia, etc.? How was that a surprise to you, or were you expecting that?
I was hoping for it.
Yeah.
And it was it was a pleasant surprise when the actual responses actually did come in. The one instance that I've had last month, that's my favorite, is that one of my clients, Damien, he sent out 8 of the cold emails that I had drafted for him. It was Tuesday morning, by the way, that he sent them all out. And within 4 hours, he received 8 responses. All of them wanted to see the deck.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the 100% strike rate on cold emails is my biggest achievement so far.
That's incredible.
Yeah. It was great. It was a combination of 4 factors, So really good investor targets that I found for him. That's 1. Really good cold emails that I've drafted, 2. And those were my doing, 50% of the success. The other thing was that Damien's got a really great business. And the other one, the 4th factor of success, was good timing. So it could have been the fact that it was the beginning of the month. It could have been the fact that it was October, beginning, like the new quarter as well. Morning hours, Tuesday morning. Yeah, maybe there's some pattern there, but I need to do a couple of more tests.
Yeah, because I imagine that the data that you might get from this would be super interesting in terms of when you're, as you said to a second ago, when you're making that outreach, the responses you're getting, how quickly you're getting them. So that, I imagine, when you build up that data set as to the responses you get, that could be super interesting as well, and a useful tool for your founders to have.
I'll do it one day. But interestingly, my cold email to Richard Branson's team, I've just drafted it on a Sunday and I've sent it on Sunday. And then I got a response on a Monday. But this one, I'm still in conversations with them right now, by the way. But this was an interesting one because this one day I've met up with my good friend Nick, and I just told him about the idea. I wanna have a chat with Richard Branson. I wanna talk fundraising playbooks with him. And Nick then tells me he somehow happens to know Will, who was Richard Branson's right-hand man for about 40 years. So I asked Nick, you know what, could you just message Will? And I'm not even asking for an introduction, but please just ask him, what was his advice be to me on how to go about reaching Richard? And then Will said we should actually contact Greg, who is the Director of Content and Communications for the entire of Branson's family. So I did. So I've drafted my own cold email to Greg. And the subject line was Eva to Nick to Will to you to ... Richard. And then the first line of the email opened with, "Hi Greg, in 6 degrees style. My friend Nick messaged Will, and then I'm trying to reach Richard Branson, but Will advised you could be the right person." So that's a playbook all in itself. I'm trying to reach Richard Branson, but you, Greg, I think you could be the person I need to speak to more.
But that's smart, because that's where the psychology comes in, doesn't it? In terms of saying, you're the gatekeeper. I've come to you. All roads lead to you, and then hopefully that'll help to put you in a really good light as well. And when you're drafting these emails or forming these templates, is your role? Is it almost like a white labeling thing? Do you actually get involved specifically yourself for your startups? How does your role work, or does it vary depending on the nature of the client?
Well, I do it 100%. I get involved 100%. So I'll learn everything that there is to learn about my client's business. And for that month that we're doing an investor sprint together, I just become an extension to their team, really. And
so the investors will interact with you personally?
No,
they don't.
So I sit behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So it's still the founder that sends out that email.
Yeah.
I'm behind the scenes. And, you know, it becomes their template, so they can tweak it, they can modify it, and, you know, they can adjust it as they wish. But they go through this process with me as well, so that they can actually see and understand how my brain thinks. And the methodology of that outreach. And later on, you know, like my goal is not really to lock in startup founders to work with me for months. Ideally, I want a founder to come to me just once, learn the stuff, and then go.
Right.
Yeah.
And how about the dreaded follow-up? Because we've all sent the initial emails, we've got some kind of engagement, and then you're thinking about, okay, well, now I need to develop the relationship.
Yes.
So again, is there a particular methodology for following up with your investors, your prospects?
Yes. So every follow-up must be a value-add follow-up. So, you know, you could say that, you know, oh, you know, hi, Greg, just to add to the previous email, just in the last week, this has happened, and this has happened. We have been fortunate enough to speak with a number of investors, and they are quite aligned. But in your case, this is what I like, and this is what I like. You know, you could say something like that. Leaving them a really well thought out comment on their LinkedIn post is a form of an indirect follow-up.
Right.
And, you know, if you're already speaking with that investor, and if you bump into them at an event, even if you do not manage to get to speak to them, but, you know, give them a little nod, it's like, hi. That's also a way of an indirect follow-up, you know, and it's very subliminal, it's very subtle, but it all adds up. And, you know, if you can have that approach to relationship building and capital raising, and you're doing well, and then you're keeping those investors in the loop, you know, like, oh, I thought to add you to our progress update because we've hit a lot of our tractions and metrics sooner than anticipated. Previously, you said that, you know, we're too early, so I just thought to let you know where we are right now. Not even making any asks. So many founders that have done that, they have told me that after one of those emails, the investor got back to them and they said, oh, that looks like some good growth. Like, congrats, we should catch up. What's your availability?
Great.
Yeah, you want them to come to you.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, what do you do if you don't get a response? And it sounds like what you're saying is maybe just don't give up, or just do subtle things.
No. So it's actually not unusual for VCs, especially, to track companies for anywhere between 8 months to even 2 years before they end up investing in them. So my response to that would be try to move that prospective investors to your progress update emails.
Yeah.
They don't need to be monthly at an early stage. You know, they can be bi-monthly, they can be quarterly, but just whichever investor lands in that category A of the most important investors that this startup wants to secure, they need to be in touch with them fairly regularly. I would say once a quarter is a minimum. Yeah.
And then in terms of the investors themselves, which tend to be the toughest nuts to crack? Is it VCs? Is it family offices? Is it angels? Or does it vary?
Family offices are the toughest ones to crack, I would say. There's not that much information on them out there. They can be quite, you know, elusive. And if you think about it, it's a family, you know, they've got their own mandate and sometimes they don't even have a strategy. So it can be quite hard to figure out what they want. Then second hardest, I would say, are angels, because quite similarly, you know, they're just individuals. You have no idea what they could want to invest in. You can look up their investment history on either Bowhurst Companies House or LinkedIn, and you can base your outreach on that. And then if they are quite active on LinkedIn or Substack or social media, then you're in luck. You can reach them based on that. The easiest ones to crack, I would say, are the VCs, because they've got websites, they've got portfolio companies, they've got LPs, they've got reports, they've got annual, you know, documents that they're posting and so on. So there's a lot of information that you can find if you know where to look.
And tell me about the dreaded pitch deck, because how you get that right, when you send it over in the process, the outreach process, and what markers should it hit? Because I'm sure I've had less exposure than you to pitch decks, but you kind of see the good, the bad, and the ugly. You see some really good, impactful ones, some ones that seem to just be all over the place, and one that it's very difficult to get a clear understanding of what the proposition is. So how do you first of all advise your clients on what a good pitch deck looks like, and also on the outreach process, when you should be sending that, at what point in the journey should you be doing that?
For some of my clients, I've gone over their pitch decks and I've redesigned it as well, if need be. But a good pitch deck, first of all, should be one in which all of the information that's contained, a founder is happy with sharing. Forget about NDAs. They are an obstacle. They are that one additional obstacle for that investor to tackle. Don't give them more homework to do. Make their life easier. That's a playbook in itself. So remove those additional steps in their user journey. So I would say about 13 to 14 slides. And again, it should be scattered with cliffhangers. You do not need to explain everything in full detail. Just hint at that, and this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen the next day, and this is the conversations we're in, and this is the growth we've seen. So it must be readable. It must be, I would say keep it to 3 key ideas per slide. So if you've got a 10-slide pitch deck, that's already 30 different points that this investor has to bear in mind. And you also have to, I've spoken to so many investors as well on how do they analyze pitch decks, because that really interests me. And again, human psychology standpoint. And when I was a deal flow manager at Block Dojo, the startup incubator, we would be getting anywhere between 200 to 300 applications per cohort. And I have gone through every single one of those pitch decks. So also looking back to how I analyze them, and many investors told me that as well, the first instance that they open a pitch deck, they're not going to read through it. They quickly scan. They quickly scroll through it. They will see the headers. They will see things in bold. They will see things that are highlighted first. Quickly scan it. Once they finish the scan, and they also pay attention to the numbers, once they've arrived at the last slide, after that quick browse, that's when they make a mental yes or no decision on whether they want to read it again and reread it more closely. So thinking of that from a graphic design perspective, from a formatting perspective, and your headers, subheaders, that is important, because this is how you grab that first initial attention. So the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
The devil's in the details.
Yeah, and that's the thing I keep getting as a message from this conversation, is about getting those right trigger points.
Yeah.
That you're hitting what the investor is actually looking for. You've done your diligence. You've done your research. So it seems like everything is in the preparation. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. It truly is. And if we've got a really good investor target with my client and they've secured the meeting, we would then sometimes go on to and create an investor-specific slide. So what I've described earlier with BP Ventures, that was it. So that's definitely an attention grabber, and we do put that somewhere early in the pitch deck. And then when it comes to attaching your pitch deck to the cold outreach emails, the first cold outreach, I don't advise attaching your pitch deck. First follow-up, no, maybe still not. Calendly link, yes. And then the third follow-up, that's when I would attach a pitch deck. Yeah. Don't play all of your cards at once. Leave something for later, because that gives you an opportunity to follow up on that investor later.
Yeah. And then when you get into the pitch meeting itself, does your role continue there, or does
no.
you? Right.
Yeah, I'm a silent partner.
Right.
So yeah, I'm behind the scenes. However, with some of my clients who wanted me there on that call in an advisor capacity, I'm happy to join. But to be honest with you, I don't think I've yet to decide if that's in their favor or not. And that's probably a question I will start asking to the investors I know. Because one of the abilities in a founder that investors want most is the ability to fundraise. So when that investor comes to themselves via cold email and then gets on a meeting and really impresses them and then closes the check all by themselves, that's good.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
It does strike me that I know you said that the model, the methodology is targeted at fundraising.
Yeah.
But it does seem to me that the principles that you're describing apply to all kinds of different industries, and there are universal principles there about doing your research, targeting, making sure you're doing it, because there are so many emails and messages that go out where people haven't really thought about those kind of issues. So it does seem to have universal applicability.
It does. And in the future, I am thinking I might put this to work in the world between VCs and LPs. I think that would be quite interesting, but for now I do like startups, fundraising. But no, you're spot on. These methods, they're sector agnostic, stage agnostic, geography agnostic, because ultimately what we're talking about is, building relationships, reaching out right. Because these days, there's so much spraying and praying, and there's so many AI tools out there that, people are starting to use, and the emails that are blasted out are very generic and just spraying and praying and really not working. But that means that those investors' inboxes are bombarded even more. Yeah. So yeah.
And on that point around AI and automation, is there a place for that in your methodology, the business, the idea? Because I totally get what you're saying. A lot, you can tell pretty often if something's been drafted by AI, ChatGPT, etc. But is there a place for that in your methodology?
I think not yet. I've tried. So I've actually loaded all of the cold emails that I've ever written for my clients, hundreds. I've loaded them all into ChatGPT agent, and I've built it all together to try to make it like my second brain and like write emails like I do. It still couldn't.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's it. It's that personal touch, and it's about making those connections.
Yeah. And, tailoring it to that specific investor, tailoring it to the specific time of the year, tailoring to who's in their portfolio. There's so many different variables, and, sometimes there's just no shortcuts. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. And if I'm, say, in a highly complex industry, say life sciences, for example, and I've got uber sophisticated investors, and they and you're looking to raise a heck of a lot of money to be able to scale the product. Is your model still suited towards that kind of business, or is it really what you're doing is really targeted to certain types of business in specific industries?
I've worked with that kind of a business.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So one of my favorite clients of mine, it was a cancer/biotech company raising their Series A. They've raised close to 20 million so far. And they were then raising their Series A. They were doing cancer vaccines, and we did an express investor sprint for them. So we've identified the ideal investor targets. We've done the whole methodology with their team and their offices in Oxford, and they now keep going with the race. So that was a great day. So yeah.
And so it seems to me, given the way the economy is at the moment, a number of significant headwinds, etc., that this kind of service that you provide is more necessary than ever, because because founders are going to need all the help that they can get to develop those relationships, to help them to scale where money isn't flooding the market. There aren't those opportunities. Do you see the market in that way? Do you see it as being a challenging one for founders now? And how do you see things going over the next few years?
Absolutely, definitely it's challenging. I think we are still in this, post-COVID hangover period, and the downturn is still kind of like extending itself. I'm a little bit sick of it, and I'm hoping that, it will pick up very soon. But then, you also have to remember some of the biggest unicorns of today, they were born in times of crisis. So, Snapchat, Uber, WhatsApp, Slack, they've all emerged on the back of the 2008 financial crisis. DoorDash from the 2020 COVID times, Cisco after the dot-com burst. So the downturn is usually, I wouldn't be surprised if the unicorns of this decade that we're going to see will be some of the companies that have been started out like in 2023. We still got a good couple of years for that to pan out, but yeah.
And lastly, if I want to find out more about the fundraising playbooks, if I want to get onto one of your masterclasses, if I want to find out a bit more how this all works, what do I do?
Yeah, there's only two places, fundraisingplaybooks.com and my LinkedIn. So I post everything on my LinkedIn. I always announce everything that's going to happen on my LinkedIn. And the link in my bio on LinkedIn is actually to sign up on my wait list. And that's important because I am working on something big that will be launching next year. And yeah, that's just how I stay in touch with founders. And as a side note, I'll also add, and I think that goes into that methodology of doing things, I don't have any automated newsletter, and I'm not going to have one. Whenever people sign up on my waitlist, I will literally chuck 400 people on BCC, and I will address them hi friends. Yeah, because I think, we talked about this earlier, right? Especially right now, as more and more Gen Z and Gen Alpha are coming into the workforce, how we build relationships, especially online, will change. It's changing already. And millennials stepping into like senior positions and so on. This is really some big cultural shifts that are taking place. And, if the cold emails are not working, I think we need to rethink at the very bottom line of why.
Well, Eva, I found that absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I think there are lessons in there, not just for founders, but I think for all of us in terms of how to connect with people, how to approach relationships. And it seems like you're onto something super exciting. So I would just encourage everyone to explore fundraisingplaybooks.com, get onto your LinkedIn and see what you're doing and start to learn how to build those relationships. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.